They called it the echo, a faint signal barely distinguishable from the cosmic background noise bouncing across the void of space. At first, we thought it was just static, a relic of a dying star or a long-gone civilization. But we were wrong, terribly wrong. The message wasn't a cry for help, it was a warning. And now, the same thing that consumed them is coming for us. The signal was first detected by Horizon Sentinel-9, a deep space probe tasked with charting the outer boundaries of our galaxy. Its sensitive instruments picked up the anomaly while scanning an uncharted region near Messier 87, a region known for its eerie silence. No star clusters, no pulsars, just a yawning abyss. This quiet pocket of space was unusual in itself, but what made it stranger was the signal. It wasn't random noise. It carried a structure, a cadence, something unmistakably artificial. At mission control, the initial reaction was subdued. Signals like this had been picked up before, usually the remnants of interstellar radiation or long-dead transmissions from forgotten probes. But when the raw data hit the analysts' desks, the excitement turned to dread. The signal was decaying, but its complexity was undeniable. Layered within the faint pulses were distinct patterns, mathematical sequences that hinted at intelligence. Dr. Elena Vargas, an astrophysicist specializing in exoplanet communication, was the first to analyze the data in detail. She spent hours poring over spectrographs and signal deconstructions. The deeper she delved, the more her fascination turned into a gnawing unease. "This isn't a greeting," she said, voice trembling as she addressed the room during an emergency briefing. "It's a warning, and it's old, very, very old." The team worked around the clock to decode the signal. Buried within its layers were fragments of visual data, grainy and distorted, like a transmission pushed through millennia of interference. The first images were incomprehensible. Shadowy structures towering against a crimson sky, alien architecture rendered in jagged lines. Then came the sound, low-frequency vibrations that hummed like a swarm of insects, punctuated by guttural, distorted tones. It was almost enough to give up. But humanity had waited for centuries for a moment like this, and there was no turning back. As the pieces began to fall into place, a terrifying narrative emerged. The civilization responsible for the signal wasn't just warning us. They were pleading with anyone who might hear them. Their message wasn't about survival, it was about inevitability. De Vargas became the unofficial leader of what the media had already dubbed the Echo Project. The world was enthralled by the discovery, but inside the labs where the signal was being dissected, the excitement was overshadowed by a growing sense of doom. As more fragments of the message were decoded, it became clear that the alien civilization, whoever they were, had faced a catastrophe on a scale humanity could barely comprehend. The images sharpened after weeks of analysis. What had first appeared as architectural structures were revealed to be colossal machines, their purpose still unclear. One sequence showed a vast network of what looked like organic tendrils spreading across a planetary surface, devouring everything in their path. Another showed skies darkened by artificial storms, crackling with unnatural lightning. The most chilling fragment depicted alien figures, their forms grotesquely twisted, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. And then the words came, or at least the closest thing to words the team could translate. We tried to stop it. We tried to hide. We tried to fight. It did not matter. The sentence was fragmented, stitched together from disparate parts of the signal, but its meaning was unmistakable. Varga stared at the translation for hours that night, her mind racing with possibilities. What kind of force could reduce a civilization capable of interstellar communication to this, a desperate fading scream into the void? Days later, the signal took a darker turn. Buried deep within its decaying framework was a second transmission, older, weaker, and far less coherent. It wasn't directed at any potential receivers. It was a recording. The sounds were haunting. Alien voices crying out, the crackle of explosions, and beneath it all, a low, rhythmic drumming that seemed to rise and fall like the heartbeat of some monstrous entity. The team nicknamed the sound the Pulse. Its source was a mystery, but its effects were clear. In every recording that followed, the alien voices became fewer, weaker, more distorted. The Pulse was like a predator, consuming everything in its path: civilizations, planets, entire systems. Vargas delivered the findings to the United Nations Emergency Assembly. Her voice was calm, but the words carried the weight of an existential threat. This wasn't a natural disaster, she said. This was an annihilation, deliberate, systematic, and if the signal's trajectory is accurate, whatever caused it is heading toward us. The world reeled as the implications of Dr. Vargas's revelation sank in. News outlets scrambled to broadcast the findings, framing it as everything from a global call to arms to an elaborate hoax. Social media exploded with theories ranging from rogue alien AIs to divine punishment. But beneath the noise, one truth resonated. Something was out there, and it was coming. The Echo Project transitioned from research to action. Leading nations pooled their resources, diverting funds from other global initiatives to focus on understanding and, if necessary, defending against the threat. For the first time in decades, the geopolitical divides that had fractured humanity began to blur. Survival demanded unity. Deep space telescopes and probes were retasked to scan the regions from which the signal had originated. The results were both enlightening and horrifying. Stars in the vicinity of the signal's origin were dimmer than they should have been, as if entire systems had been drained of energy. Planets once thought to harbor life were barren, stripped of atmosphere and ecosystems. The pattern stretched out like a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to Earth. Meanwhile, inside the Echo Project's command center, the translation efforts intensified. Each breakthrough brought a clearer picture of the aliens' final days. The Pulse wasn't just a destructive force. It was adaptive, relentless, and, most disturbingly, aware. It sought out life, consuming it and using it to grow. In one chilling segment of the transmission, the aliens described it as the Harbinger, a name that sent shivers down every spine in the room. They thought they could contain it, Vargas explained to the team during a grim briefing. They built machines, entire planetary shields to hold it back. But it learned, it adapted, and when it couldn't be stopped, it didn't just destroy them, it used them. Every living thing it touches becomes part of it. The question no one dared ask lingered in the air. How do you fight something that turns your strength into its weapon? As the public learned more about the threat, fear spread like wildfire. Survivalist groups formed, retreating to remote bunkers. Cults emerged, worshipping the Pulse as a divine force, proclaiming its arrival as humanity's Judgment Day. But not everyone surrendered to despair. A coalition of scientists, engineers, and military leaders convened to prepare humanity's defense. They called it Project Beacon. Its goal was twofold: to buy Earth time and to create a contingency plan if evacuation became necessary. Massive orbital platforms were constructed, armed with advanced weaponry, designed to counter any potential biological or technological threats. Experimental spacecraft were fast-tracked, equipped for deep space colonization in the event Earth had to be abandoned. But beneath all the action, one question gnawed at Vargas and her team. Why Earth? If the pulse was truly indiscriminate, why was it heading here? Was it drawn by the remnants of the alien signal, or was there something about humanity itself that made us its next target? As Project Beacon accelerated, the first signs of the pulse's presence began to appear. It started small, anomalies in space-time readings, faint gravitational waves rippling through the outer reaches of the solar system. At first, scientists dismissed them as cosmic coincidences, but the patterns grew undeniable. The pulse wasn't just coming, it was already here, lurking at the edges of human detection. The probes sent to investigate these anomalies vanished without a trace. No debris, no signals, just silence. The first manned mission to study the phenomenon met a similar fate. Erebus 1, a state-of-the-art reconnaissance ship, disappeared from radar 48 hours after entering the anomaly's perimeter. Its last transmission was a distorted voice, the words barely intelligible, but enough to chill the blood of anyone who heard them.
"It sees us! It's—"
The silence that followed was deafening. On Earth, the mood darkened. News of Erebus 1's disappearance triggered mass protests and riots. People demanded answers, but there were none to give. Every simulation, every predictive model pointed to the same grim conclusion. Earth had less than 2 years before the pulse arrived. Dr. Vargas and her team worked tirelessly, but the more they uncovered about the pulse, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a technological or biological phenomenon. It was something more. It defied known physics, moving between dimensions as easily as light bends through glass. Some theorized it was a living organism, others a weapon created by a civilization far older and more advanced than the one that had sent the signal. Vargas began to suspect the truth lay somewhere in between. "We're not dealing with a single entity," she explained during a late-night session with her closest colleagues. "It's an ecosystem, a hive. Every piece of it is connected, but it acts with a singular purpose: to consume, to propagate, and it's intelligent, far beyond our comprehension." As the deadline loomed, desperate measures were taken. One faction of Project Beacon proposed launching an array of nuclear warheads into space, hoping to disrupt the pulse's path. Another advocated for activating the deep void resonators, experimental devices capable of generating localized black holes. Both plans were fraught with risk. Any miscalculation could obliterate Earth before the pulse even arrived. The final vote was deadlocked, leaving Vargas to cast the deciding vote. "We don't even know if it can be destroyed," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "We need more time to understand it. If we act rashly, we'll only speed up our own destruction." The team shifted focus to decoding the remaining fragments of the alien signal, hoping for some last piece of guidance. That's when they found it. A single line of text, buried deep within the noise, repeated over and over. like a mantra. The light will blind it. The light will end it. The discovery of the cryptic phrase ignited a glimmer of hope. The light will blind it. The light will end it. The team didn't know what it meant, but it was the first actionable clue they had found. For days, debates raged in the Echo Project's command center. What kind of light? Did it refer to literal illumination, some form of energy, or was it symbolic? Dr. Vargas pushed the team to think outside conventional frameworks. "We are dealing with something beyond our comprehension," she argued. "If these beings thought light could stop it, we have to trust they knew what they were doing. Our job is to figure out what they meant." To test the theory, Project Beacon initiated Operation Lumina, a multi-phase plan to weaponize light on a planetary scale. Massive orbital solar arrays, originally designed for sustainable energy projects, were re-engineered to generate concentrated beams of ultraviolet and gamma radiation. Earth-based particle accelerators were repurposed to create artificial bursts of light, mimicking the intensity of a supernova. As the technology was deployed, more anomalies began to manifest in the outer solar system. A series of strange distortions appeared around Neptune, rippling like heat waves across the vast expanse of space. Long-range scanners detected faint echoes of the pulse, not a sound, but a presence, vast and unknowable. It was closing in. The light experiments yielded mixed results. In controlled environments, high-intensity bursts of energy appeared to disrupt smaller, simulated pulse-like anomalies. But scaling the experiments to match the anticipated size of the entity presented an enormous challenge. Earth simply didn't have the infrastructure to produce enough power. That's when Vargas proposed a radical idea. "We can't create enough light," she admitted during a tense strategy meeting, "but we can borrow it." Her plan was audacious, bordering on insane. She proposed using the sun itself as a weapon. By building a massive array of satellites equipped with solar mirrors, humanity could focus a portion of the sun's energy into an intense beam, creating a planetary-scale laser. The concept wasn't new. Solar engineering had been theorized for decades, but attempting it in such a short time frame was unprecedented. The global response was immediate and polarized. Skeptics called it a death wish, warning that any miscalculation could scorch the Earth's surface or destabilize the sun's energy output. But with the pulse's arrival imminent, there was no time for safer alternatives. The world's governments gave the go-ahead, and the project was named Helios Edge. Construction began immediately. Factories churned out components for the solar mirrors, and launch pads worked around the clock to send satellites into orbit. The array's design resembled a massive flower unfurling in space, its petals stretching millions of kilometers to harness the sun's energy. It was a breathtaking sight, but one that carried the weight of desperation. As the array neared completion, the first undeniable signs of the pulse's approach reached Earth. Strange phenomena disrupted the planet. Power grids failed without explanation. Entire swaths of the night sky appeared to vanish, as if swallowed by an invisible force. People reported vivid, shared nightmares, visions of dark tendrils wrapping around the Earth, suffocating it in an unending shadow. The final piece of the alien signal was decoded just days before Helios Edge was scheduled to activate. It wasn't a warning or instruction, but a lament. We became the light. We burned ourselves to stop it. We failed. The final transmission shook the Echo Project team to its core. The alien civilization's cryptic warning wasn't just a strategy, it was a confession. They had tried the same approach humanity was now attempting, and they had failed. Dr. Vargas sat in silence after reading the translation, her mind racing. "They didn't understand it completely," she said, finally breaking the quiet. "They thought light could stop it, but they didn't know how. Maybe we can finish what they started. Maybe we can do it better." The tension in the control room was palpable as the countdown to the Helios Edge activation began. All over the world, people watched the live stream, their faces illuminated by screens showing the colossal solar array. In classrooms, homes, and emergency shelters, humanity collectively held its breath. This was their last stand. At T-2 hours, the anomalies reached Earth's orbit. Satellites began failing one by one, blinking out as if swallowed by an unseen predator. Long-range telescopes captured horrifying glimpses of what lay beyond Neptune. Tendrils of dark energy snaking through space, coalescing into shapes that defied logic. The pulse wasn't just a force, it was a presence, vast and alive, radiating a malevolent intelligence. When the first tendril breached Earth's magnetic field, chaos erupted. Power plants overloaded, and entire cities were plunged into darkness. Aircraft fell from the sky as navigation systems failed. But the most disturbing effects were psychological. People began to hear things, whispers, incomprehensible but insistent, as if something was probing their minds. Suicides spiked. In the Echo Project headquarters, some of the scientists collapsed, clutching their heads and screaming about a void that had no end. But Helios Edge was ready. The solar array came online, its massive mirrors focusing beams of concentrated energy toward a single point. The target was a point just beyond the moon, where the first tendrils of the pulse had gathered. The light struck with a blinding intensity, a concentrated blast of ultraviolet and gamma radiation so powerful it momentarily lit the night sky as if it were day. At first, it worked. The tendrils recoiled, writhing and retreating like living things burned by the light. The gravitational anomalies stabilized, and for a brief moment, humanity dared to hope. The world erupted in cheers as news of the successful strike spread. But the pulse wasn't done. The tendrils regrouped, and this time they moved faster, more deliberately. They avoided the focused light, slipping past it like shadows evading a torch. Then came the sound, an unearthly roar that wasn't heard but felt, resonating through the ground, through the air, through human bodies. It was a scream of rage, of hunger. The pulse was no longer probing or observing. It was attacking. Helios Edge's operators scrambled to adjust the array, attempting to track the pulse's movements and redirect the beams. But the entity was too vast, too adaptive. For every tendril they repelled, two more emerged, advancing toward Earth with terrifying speed. In the Echo Project Command Center, Vargas made a desperate call. "We need to overload the array," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Push it to its limits. If the light isn't enough, we'll burn everything we've got. Every watt, every joule, all of it." Her colleagues hesitated, knowing the risks. Overloading the array could destabilize the sun's surface, unleashing solar storms that might ravage Earth. But there was no alternative. "Do it," Vargas ordered. The countdown to the overload began. Across the world, humanity braced itself for what might be its final moments. Helios Edge's mirrors, already glowing from the intensity of their focus, began to shimmer with a dangerous, pulsating heat. The sun, harnessed for humanity's last stand, flared brighter than it ever had in recorded history. As the array pushed beyond its operational limits, the Earth itself seemed to react. The atmosphere rippled with auroras, shimmering in unnatural hues of violet and gold. Seismic sensors picked up tremors worldwide, as if the planet could feel the strain of what was coming. The pulse surged forward, its tendrils twisting and coiling, forming shapes that defied human comprehension. Entire sections of the sky disappeared into an abyssal black, as if the stars themselves had been consumed. The entity was no longer just a presence. It was here, and it was massive. The final order was given. Helios Edge activated its overload sequence. The concentrated beams converged on the largest mass of the pulse, a dark, writhing core hovering just beyond the moon. The light wasn't just intense, it was blinding, a searing lance of energy that cut through the fabric of space itself. Observatories across the globe recorded the event, their instruments overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the output. For a moment, it seemed to work. The pulse recoiled violently, its tendrils disintegrating in the onslaught of light. The core quivered, its once imposing form shrinking and fraying. Earth's sensors recorded a massive energy spike within the pulse, as if the entity was imploding under its own weight. The world erupted in cautious celebration. Across cities and towns, people emerged from shelters to witness the spectacle in the sky. The light of Helios Edge was so bright it cast shadows at midnight. For the first time in months, humanity felt hope. But then, the unthinkable happened. The pulse adapted. Its core split into countless smaller fragments, each one writhing and alive. The fragments moved with terrifying speed, scattering in all directions. Most fled beyond Earth's orbit, vanishing into the depths of space, but a significant portion surged toward the planet. The first fragment struck a satellite, enveloping it in an instant. The second impacted a space station, reducing it to debris. The rest hurtled toward Earth. The fragments didn't cause physical destruction upon impact. They weren't projectiles. They were something far worse. Wherever they landed, the effects were immediate and horrifying. Cities descended into chaos as the fragments released tendrils of darkness that spread like a living infection. People caught in their path froze in place, their eyes turning black, their bodies twitching as if possessed. Dr. Vargas and her team watched helplessly as the devastation unfolded. "It's using us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's turning us into itself." In the chaos, a single realization emerged. Humanity had underestimated the pulse's intelligence. The overload had hurt it, perhaps even weakened it, but it hadn't been enough. The fragments were a survival mechanism, a way for the entity to ensure its continuity, even in the face of annihilation. As the Echo Project headquarters began to succumb to the spreading darkness, Vargas made one final decision. She initiated a last-ditch effort to send out humanity's own signal, a warning to anyone who might listen. The transmission contained everything they had learned about the pulse, its patterns, its weaknesses, its terrifying adaptability. The team's final words were recorded in the transmission. "We failed to stop it, but maybe you won't. The light hurts it, but it's not enough. Don't make the same mistake. Survive. As the pulse consumed the last remnants of Earth's resistance, the signal was sent out into the void, carrying with it humanity's desperate plea for help. Somewhere in the vastness of space, a distant probe picked up the faintest whisper of the message. Another civilization, perhaps more advanced, perhaps as desperate as humanity once was, began to listen. And the cycle began again.